This week, we've got an amazing interview with Austin Shifrin, an illustrious brother who has been on the program before with the release of his first book, and now he's got a new book out, Black Ink, Further Stars, a collection of Masonic articles sure to shed light on your Masonic journey. Join us for the conversation. Coming right up.
Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
Welcome back to the show. This is episode number 649. This week, we've got a wonderful interview, as you heard at the top of the program, with Illustrious Brother Austin Shifrin, who actually was with us in episode number 538. At that time, his book, More Light, Collected Writings, which is available on Amazon.com currently. And if you're lucky enough to catch him in person, I'm sure he'll get you a personally autographed copy. But he is on the show this week again to talk about his new book and some other tangentially related Masonic questions and all things Masonic, as we might say. I want to thank our producers, fellows, contributors, and legacy partners of the WCY podcast. Without you, this show doesn't happen, and you guys have been making it happen for over 10 years. It's pretty amazing, and I am just so full of gratitude at being the person who gets to bring this and continue this work into the future and just making it happen week after week. So thank you all so very much. If you are curious on how you can help support the WCY podcast, head on over to our website, wcypodcast.com, click on Support the Show, and check out the various options. You know, our website's got a ton of information and little bonuses and downloads and things, so if you find yourself over there, it's a veritable treasure hunt. You never know what you'll find. I do want to say thank you to a couple of brothers who may or may not be listening. Of course, Brother Adam Rigdon, Brother Vic Magnus, and Brother Lloyd. We went and we spent... I spent 9 hours in the car with those guys all the way down to Tennessee and 9 hours coming back. And it really didn't feel like 9 hours at all. Just a bunch of friends chit-chatting the whole way, solving all the world's problems as we do with windshield masonry. I've been talking about going to this cave degree down in Tennessee for quite a number of weeks now. And we got back. It was amazing, which is the reason why I'm a little late in putting this podcast out. But that notwithstanding, what an excellent time, what an excellent adventure it was. And I also just have to say to the Grand Lodge of Florida, who put on the degree in the cave on Saturday, wonderful job. It was quite an impressive display, and I'm really looking forward to making that happen. It was a fantastic journey and an experience that it's so easy to go, well, I'll go next year. Don't. Just go the next time it's available if you can make it. It is very much well worth your time, and the Brotherhood is top-notch. Now, let's get into this awesome interview with Illustrious Brother Austin Shifrin. Let's check it out. All right, everybody, we're back, and this week we've got a special guest, a returning guest. This week we have Illustrious Brother Austin Shifrin from the Valley of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's the author of the book More Light, Collected Masonic Writings from 2017 to 2021, and he's got a new book coming out, and we wanted to have him on to talk a little bit about this and, all things Masonic, as he is somebody who's been in the craft, knows a lot, and has some really great opinions and stories and all things of that nature. So, Illustrious Brother Austin, thank you so much for making the time to come on the program again.
Brother Robert, thank you so much for having me. I am a big admirer of your podcast. I had listened before I made my appearance a couple of years ago, but ever since then, just between the quality of your content and the longevity of the program, you've clearly hit on a winning formula. So I'm very grateful that you're giving me this hospitality, and looking forward to our chat.
Likewise. So if the brothers and any friends out there listening to the podcast are curious and want to hear the last time Brother Austin was on the program, that would have been March 27th of 2022, about 2 years ago. He was in episode number 538. And you can listen to that 42-minute conversation, which spanned the gamut. And we talked a lot about the book and some other things. So be sure to check that out. Brother Austin, so first of all, what have you been up to the last couple of years?
Oh, good heavens. So it's a combination of quite a bit of stuff, right? I've got my involvement with my craft lodge, Lodge Ad Lucem number 812. I'm also a member of, let's be kind and call it a handful of different appendant bodies. So I've remained pretty consistent and active in all of those. But in addition to which, one of the neat opportunities that the first book has afforded me is this chance to go and visit a lot of different Masonic bodies, both Blue Lodges, a couple of different Scottish Rite Valleys, some York Rite bodies as well, and present, as a speaker. It's been a great honor to meet different brethren in different locations, mostly Pennsylvania, but a handful in Ohio and New York as well, and just share both some of the material that comes out of that first book, More Light, as well as crafting a couple of new presentations along the way. And those became the core of the new book that I have published only recently.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're busy in the quarries. There are a lot of brothers out there who, well, let's just say that they get involved. They might find a niche or something and do some writing, and then it sort of takes them out of practicing Masonry in terms of, going to meetings and sort of what some might consider the mundane aspects of the craft, but nonetheless are the necessary portions of our attendance and the goings on at the local lodge level, because without that, nothing else happens. And I just, as a personal appreciation to you from me for staying active in the bodies and doing what you can to do that, because if we're not doing that, then sometimes people might accuse us of talking the talk without walking the walk. So I appreciate that.
Brother, I appreciate it. It's tricky. I think as with a lot of other aspects in life, sometimes the big challenge is just striking a balance. I wouldn't have had reason for my original writings had it been not for my interest into activity in the craft, right? And so there would be a weird irony or maybe even a hypocrisy if I wrote with passion and enthusiasm about the craft and then started to drift away in terms of my literal attendance, right? But realistically, I also recognize that you start feeling pulled in at least two different directions, because there's the tug or the call of your conscience that says, look, you have an obligation to these bodies. You swore an oath that you would show up barring certain specific circumstances, and you really got to be bending the definition to say, well, I felt like staying home and writing, so I didn't go to this meeting, right? But by the same token, as a duty to yourself and wanting to express your own unique internal voice, you have to carve out time for your writing as a practice. And honestly, trying to strike a balance in that is a challenge. I'm not going to say I've met it perfectly. I'm just doing my best.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. You've kind of alluded to this idea that you've done some new presentations and things that have led you to perhaps a new book. So can you give us an overview of your latest book and what inspired you to write it?
Yes, absolutely. So I think what I could start by telling you is a little bit about the contents, right? And I'm going to do a little compare and contrast as long as that's okay. The first book that I put out 2 years ago, entitled More Light, is primarily a collection of articles that appeared in the magazine of our Valley of Pittsburgh Scottish Rite, which was then combined with a history presentation at the end. It's a bit longer piece of content. And having said that, the articles are a little bit more short, direct, and to the point, right? So it makes for some pretty snappy reading. It's 15 different articles, and then you've got some subject matter, and we get right to the heart of it pretty quickly. What I did this time around was collect some pieces that are a little bit longer, which gives each topic a little bit more room to breathe, right? The first presentation, though, was not of more recent origin. I actually wrote it a couple of years back for presentation at Council of Deliberation for gathering of the folks involved in the ritualistic work of the valleys in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. Good grief, I didn't even realize it was that long ago. So I presented that one back in July of 2018. And that paper is called Ritual Across Time and Space. basically what that covers is it talks about how different cultures throughout history have used theater and performance as part of their moral instruction. The next 4 chapters that I've got, though, are of more recent vintage. So there's one that I produced for a presentation for Virginia Research Lodge. They'll do periodic online gatherings, so I was able to deliver this one remotely. And it's about the Chamber of Reflection. The title on that one was The Chamber of Reflection, Mortality, Morphology, and Meaning. And that one's basically about how the contemplation of death can enrich and inspire our lives, drawing on both some ancient and some modern sources. So, dating all the way back to Paracelsus and the alchemists, the symbolism of tarot, but then, skipping forward even to your very own podcast. I'm not going to give any spoilers here. I'm going to wait for people to have the chance to uncover that one. The third chapter cool. was a presentation that I delivered for a symposium on esoteric Freemasonry at Lodge Ad Lucem, number 812. It's called The Tarot of Virtue. And this is a study of how the tarot can be used as a visual aid to study the 18 virtues in the system of the philosopher André Comte Sponville. Next up, at one point in August of last year, I was invited to make a presentation at an ingathering of the Allied Masonic degrees. So I put together a history presentation called How the Allied Masonic Degrees and the Grand College of Rites Complement Each Other. And it just talks about how those two different bodies work together to preserve Masonic history. And then the last chapter in the new book comes from a presentation that I delivered at Grand Lodge of PA in October of last year, called The Stuff Freemasonry is Made Of, the Physical Properties of the Old Testament. And that just talks about how we can better understand some of the stories that we refer to in Masonic bodies or from the Old Testament in general, when we've got a better grasp of the physical settings and the artifacts that are being referenced in those stories. So, each of these presentations was originally custom created for delivery at those different bodies and those different events. And I felt like I had kind of a rich enough spectrum of material there to put together as a new book.
It sounds like you've really done quite a bit of work. I mean, obviously, I think the way this happens is a very organic process. You sound somewhat like some authors that I've also interviewed that they don't typically sit down with the intent of writing a book. They have these experiences and maybe presentations that they've prepared and then go, well, gee whiz, this sort of fits the narrative for an entire book. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. I think that my approach to this, I'm like a lot of other brethren in that I'm not a retired fella. I have a day job. I've got a relationship. There's various different demands on my time, various different things that I care about in my life. And, a fellow's got to confront that other challenge of balancing those priorities, right? Having said that, I know that I also, have a love of writing. And I've been very encouraged by the feedback that I've gotten from people about what I've been able to put out into the Masonic discourse. The only real way that I can discipline myself to continue with the writing, rather than looking way off on the horizon and having, one larger target or larger project, has been the fact that I've had these milestones set up in the shorter term all along. So if I know that I've, scheduled appearances for different bodies in different places over the course of a year, and I'm trying to work up presentations suitable for those engagements, you write up a 1 hour long presentation here and 1 hour long presentation there, and eventually it really aggregates to something more significant. Now, I like to think that then winds up producing a book where if you've got a collection of material that spans a couple of different subjects, it's not exclusively one aspect, let's say one aspect of Freemasonry or another, giving people that amount of variety is going to appeal to some folks. I recognize that there might be some strengths if I was to tackle a single subject and give it even more column inches or whatever metric you want to measure that by. But having said that, at this stage, I like the fact that I can offer people a variety of different subject matter all together in one place. And I like to hope that it's capturing people's interest.
I think that's absolutely spot on. When you decide to take a presentation, let's say that, and I guess this is kind of the Austin Shifrin advice column for just a moment.
Okay.
I think about budding Masonic writers, and there are a number of brothers who really have got some great stuff to share. What's your advice in turning a presentation into a writing? And is it as simple as scripting it, or is it more nuanced?
Oh, you know what? I am grateful that I've become a somewhat more seasoned or experienced writer, but I'm not going to claim to have the silver bullet to answer this question just yet. I will say it was kind of funny. Once I gathered together the couple of pieces that I wanted to include in Black Ink, Farther Stars, I realized that I had actually written each of these presentations even with somewhat different tone than each other, right? So looking at, like, for instance, in particular, the one on the Allied Masonic degrees and the Grand College of Rites, like, I know that the way I wrote the introduction to that piece for delivery, live and in person, was very conversational. Whereas I don't necessarily, I sometimes take a little bit more of an academic tone in my papers more generally. So I recognize that what I gathered together for this book was not perfectly homogeneous, right? It wasn't perfectly consistent internally. And I'm certainly hoping that people aren't going to find that jarring. But at this point, both of the books, I'd say what they have in common with each other is that they're both intentionally a little bit of a potpourri, right? The amount of variety and diversity of subjects within the collected work is intentional. I very strongly agree with you about this idea that once any of us who are venturing out there as Masonic authors have finished the manuscript, that task of marketing, the idea of being in a narrow niche is kind of a double-edged sword. It works for you and against you. Of course, the challenge is you may not necessarily reach the same nationwide or global audience as if you were writing horror or romance, right? But having said that, because you have that niche market, it is in some ways easier to find the people who are interested in your work, because they've already sort of clustered themselves together in certain places, whether I'm talking literally or virtually. So in terms of trying to reach that audience, the idea of writing in such a specific niche is both a blessing and a curse.
I love where you're going here with this. My other question is related to the content of the book. As our interests are varied, our presentations vary. I've read your first book. It is, in fact, it reads academic, but not like to the point where you need a thesaurus to get through it. So I find it to be complementary in both readability and content. So I'm looking forward to the next book as well. As somebody who writes as an academic, I think it can be a challenge from time to time to unpack what you want to say in the way you need to say it so that you're painting a clear picture. And sometimes people, I feel like, have a hard time getting through that sort of, it's like somebody who maybe fast forwards through the first part of a movie to get to the point, Yeah. But I think for you as a Masonic author and how you come at this as an approach in a way that is academic, how do your personal experiences and beliefs influence your writing?
That's a lovely question. When I think about the subject matter in this new book, there are pieces or essays in here that are more anthropological, right? So like the one talking about how cultures throughout history have used the performing arts as part of their moral instruction. Even the one talking about the physical properties of the Old Testament. All of these are sort of more delivering what's intended as an academic report of objective facts to the greatest possible extent that they can be gathered and verified. Whereas like the one on the Chamber of Reflection is really kind of personal to me, because not only is there a question of what have been different philosophical perspectives on mortality, but there's like, what were the personal experiences that I was going through at the time that I chose to write that piece that were forcing me to confront concepts of mortality? I think that, at the risk of being a little bit cliche, I think it's remembering that there's a place for everything and everything in its place, right? So if I'm intentionally going for that potpourri, if I'm intentionally going for a diversity of perspectives, it's okay for some of the pieces to come out a little bit more stuffy and other ones to come across as being a little bit more from the heart. And I think one of the reasons I'm able to give myself license to write that way is because I can enjoy reading a wide variety of material. So if I can't be guaranteed of knowing the inner hearts and minds of everybody in my audience, I can at least say, all right, well, what book would I like to pick up, right? And then write for that guy, write for the guy in the mirror, as it were. At least that's my attempt to answer your question. I hope I've covered it reasonably.
Yeah, I think so. You spoke a little bit about, in the writing process, personal experiences within the writing process where you involved, say, for example, confronting ideas of mortality. When I think about that, it leads me to my next question, which is sort of revolves around surprising discoveries during the process of research for your book. I often think that we get so hung up on perhaps things we've discovered within text, but sometimes, as you alluded to, those discoveries aren't what we've found in the paper, but within ourselves. And so for that, I'd say, while doing the work for this book, did you encounter any surprising discoveries during the process, either within you or perhaps on a page somewhere while you were doing research?
Yeah, I think there were two places in the course of this process where I uncovered something that, no, now that I think of it, three places in this process where I really uncovered something that resonated in a more personal fashion, right? So when I was working on this piece regarding the Chamber of Reflection and this idea of confronting mortality, there was a very frequently trotted out quote that came up that I knew I was going to want to integrate into this discussion, which came from Brother Albert Pike, who said, "What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and the world remains and is immortal." And I knew that this quote was something that I wanted to tie in as supporting one of the perspectives one takes on mortality and, the 180-degree swivel, what should it make us think about in terms of what we do with the time that is allotted to us. But I realized what an interesting hall of mirrors I had also put myself in, because for me, writing this material is part of what I'm hoping to leave behind. So it struck me as ironic that I'm writing an essay about what you leave behind, and the act of what I'm doing is, in fact, itself producing the artifact that I'm going to leave behind. It was such a pleasurable experience with the first book, receiving some of the feedback that I've gotten from people who read it. So one story I heard from a fellow was, say I was interested in picking up your first book, and I put it in my Amazon wish list, and then my wife found it there and got it for me for Christmas. And what a heartwarming thing that was, for me to picture this brother who I'd never met, picking out one of the gifts from underneath the tree and unwrapping it, and that being the thing that he was looking forward to. That really warmed my heart, But then there was another anecdote that I got from someone else online who said, "Hey, I had been contemplating whether to join Masonry for a couple of years now and had been on the fence for a long time. And I decided to purchase and read your book. And I figured I'm going to take the leap, and I've submitted my petition." And so that idea of having this, beautiful gift for me of getting to have an impact that's going to, have these long-term repercussions on other people's lives, this gets to be the thing that I leave behind. That's pretty personally exciting.
I love that entire view of this. I've often thought about this as we're leaving behind these footprints, whether digital or in books or print. And so this is going to sound gross, right? But it's kind of like when you see a spider in your house, right, and you kill it, and your friend goes, well, when you see one, there's 200 more somewhere around, right?
Right.
And so my poor analogy here is when you've gotten one compliment, there's got to be 100 other people who didn't reach out to you, who maybe have something similar to say, that they joined because of this awesome essay you wrote. They joined because they were on the fence on Masonry, but you might have said literally, it could have been a sentence in a whole essay that made them just go, yep, that's it. That's it. And so I love the idea. And it is, in fact, heartwarming to think that some brother on Christmas morning opens up a gift and, it's your book. And like how humbling, too. That's so cool.
Oh, very much so. Maybe I wouldn't have gone immediately to the spider metaphor. But I do know I recently heard this great interview with Brother Chris Hodap. And I think that we can probably all agree that his, among his other publications, his contribution with Freemasons for Dummies has probably resulted in thousands upon thousands of gentlemen joining the fraternity because they got a nice, clear, straightforward explanation and answer to plenty of questions that they must have had. But when I heard this interview with him, he was also describing when and why he himself joined. And I don't want to mangle the story, but if I'm remembering it correctly, it was a little bit of a fluke, and it had something to do with needing to have an out-of-town funeral for one of his in-laws. And as we know, the Masonic funeral service is often one of the few public spaces where the general public gets exposed to what Masonic ritual can look like. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is that kind of ripple effect where we think about, like, had it not been for that one experience that, Brother Hodap had, then the further result of these other thousands upon thousands of Masons joining might not have been possible. So I like to think about the second anecdote where this young man said to me that he'd been hemming and hawing about joining, but his opportunity to read my first book somehow helped nudge him in the right direction. And I every now and then, I just love to sit and ponder, like, I wonder where he is now and whether he has helped usher, other new members into the fold. And to me, that's just super exciting.
I agree. I've heard the story. In fact, I believe I recorded the lecture that Brother Hodap did in episode 100 of this show. Actually, I asked him if I could record it, and he's like, yeah, that's cool, man. And you are correct. I believe it was his father-in-law who passed, I think. And yeah. But it left such an impression on him, right? And so all of these people joined. And it is absolutely the ripple effect or butterfly effect. Gosh, where would we be? We might not have had books like Dan Brown's books or, other such
who can even cultures. Say? Yeah. Kind of wild to conjecture about it.
How do you see the role of Freemasonry in the modern world? And does your book do you have any areas where the book might address contemporary issues facing Masonic communities?
I can't say that the book comes at that topic head on, right? But I will say that I feel like the book does, in a tangential way, address one of the ways or reasons that there is a new demand for what Freemasonry can provide in contemporary society. A lot of us spend a lot of time wringing our hands or clutching our pearls and lamenting at the declining numbers of membership in Freemasonry. But instead of choosing to focus on that negative right now, I tend to think about the fact that we are at present in a unique position where we live in a world where people's engagement with organized religion may be declining, but their want and need for some kind of spiritual connection and some kind of community connection is not only not going away, but maybe even escalating. So Freemasonry is uniquely positioned right now in this place to supply society in general, and men in particular who are feeling kind of adrift, with a kind of spiritual connection that they do want and need. So I think about the essay on the tarot as a visual aid to the study of virtues. And I say to myself, yeah, this serves a purpose and fills a gap where I know that there are people who are saying, let's say that I don't want to base my choice of ethical behavior on just because some authority figure said so, right? What if I choose to instead apply and deploy my intellect towards the problem of what is the purpose and the goal of ethical behavior? What are the nuances of ethical behavior? If I'm trying to dissect it at a level of greater granularity than just, be good, and like that two words is the be all and end all of the declaration, then what are the nuances? What is the progression from basic virtue to sophisticated virtue? And how will I navigate that study? And I feel like this essay, makes a beeline right for that subject matter. So I'll admit that the book doesn't take a broader societal view and say, what should Freemasonry be doing for society at large right now? But I do feel like it does participate in that discourse nonetheless.
I have to say that as you very well articulated the deficiency that exists in fulfillment in people's lives today in terms of their organized religion and the increase of spirituality. There is that nexus point that does seem to allow people to, let's say, access Masonry at a unique point in history that it can assist. In fact, as you were talking about it, it's kind of a goosebump moment. So I appreciated that. Something that I am curious about, and this might be spicy, but we'll see what you think. Objective facts sometimes get in the way of a good story. I know you are active as a Mason at local levels and at national levels, having, going to ICOD, the international, or that's the Council of Deliberation for the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite. Many times at those organizational meetings, we find that there are things being discussed in terms of the updating of rituals or, any number of things might come up there. But I'll say, have there been instances in which you were working with, say, an organization and this sort of objective facts getting in the way of a good story or a practice within Masonry has become an issue where you felt it needed to be factual or rewritten or something of that nature?
I'm grateful for the question. I have never yet been placed in a position of responsibility where I was required to mediate between disputing parties in an issue like this. But I will say, for anybody who's particularly interested in that subject, and I think I'm following you, correctly. What I would like to recommend is another author, a fellow who I've been in contact with online recently, only because I snapped up his little book, and I'm enjoying it just so much. I just enjoy taking the opportunity to recommend it to other people. There's an author by the name of Istvan Horvath, and he currently lives in Canada. And he's got this book out called Weekly Masonic Doubts, where he talks about debatable and disputed subjects in Freemasonry. So it's, his book also is kind of a collection of fairly short pieces, short articles, because they're intended for, like weekly contemplation, right? So I'm pacing myself and I'm just picking up one of them a week and reading it, digesting it, and enjoying it. And he's blunt. He is not pulling any punches. And he takes a nice hard line on the importance of academic verifiability and objectivity in the things that Masons write, publish, and pass around. And there's a number of different reasons for this, only one of which is making sure that we are all correctly informed. But the fact of the matter is, I think equally important is the notion that if we relax our academic rigor and we allow ourselves to trade in myth and lore, then it runs the risk of making us look silly outside of our fraternity to other people with greater standards of academic rigor, right? I have joked around in the very recent past about this, never let the facts get in the way of telling a good story. But that's only as a guy who likes to kibitz a lot. And the fact of the matter is, I think it's okay when we gather intentionally to share legends if we put out the caveat very publicly and well in advance that what we're discussing at the moment is myth and lore, and then set aside some separate time and really challenge our intellect, engage in academic rigor, and make sure that we stand up to the standards and the scrutiny of the outside world so we don't run the risk of making ourselves look foolish.
Wonderful. I will definitely put a link back in the show notes so that folks can pick that book up as well. Brother Austin, so what message or key takeaway do you hope readers will gain from your latest work? And how do you envision it contributing to the broader understanding of, let's say, Masonic principles?
So first, I'd say that the key takeaway is that I know that there is material out there and already available to the interested student that is explicitly and directly about Freemasonry, right? You can read from ancient Masonic authors their take and their perspective on what the meaning is of the plumb, the level, and the square. You can pick up your Mackey and your Bernard Jones and get some good authoritative sources on the material that is, has the square and compass slapped on it. What the key takeaway is from this book is that there are these topics that are tangential to Freemasonry, that are Freemasonry adjacent, right? If I'm looking for a hyphenate, I'd say they're Freemasonry adjacent, but just by coming at it from another angle, shed more light on our practice in the craft and the fraternity. So I think if we throw blinders on ourselves and read only exclusively about Freemasonry for long enough, it starts being a little bit like, you remember that old cartoon, The Smurfs, where the little blue creatures who start substituting the word Smurf for like half of what they say in a sentence, and they'll talk about like, oh, I smurfed to Smurf the Smurf. Like, you start to drown yourself in Freemasonry. And I think that one of the positive aspects of this book is it talks about things that are Masonic, but not exclusively about Freemasonry. And by coming at it from these tangents and these angles, it helps us better define what's at the center.
I love it. For those interested in this book, it's called Black Ink, Farther Stars. And if you're interested in picking this up, you can get it currently exclusively on Amazon.com. We will put links in the show notes where you can pick this particular text up. And also, we'll link his first book as well. I have to say, I love design. I love photography. I do a lot of graphic design. I do magazine layouts and all of these other kinds of things for my day job, and also for, as some of us have side hustles and things. I absolutely love the cover art of your book. I think it stands out. I love everything down to the font. So great job putting this together. It looks like a book that if I passed it on the shelf, I'd go, oh, I need that. So great job.
Robert, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I will share a couple of small factoids. So I selected a couple of stock images myself, the sky in the background, and this little figure who you see in the center of the front cover is a medieval astronomer who was accused of sorcery, holding a disc with magic figures on it from the 13th century. But I can't take credit for the combining of the elements. The cover design for the book was executed by my brother, Jeremy McKnight, from Lodge Ad Lucem number 812. I want to give him a shout out. I agree. I must say, I feel like he did terrific work. Yeah,
it's people out there might not always appreciate these things, but there's highlights to the cover. There's, low light. It checks all of the boxes for me as somebody who deals with engagement of people and, what they're looking at and how to get their attention. So it's a piece of art for sure. So thank you for that. Brother Austin, do you have any upcoming speaking engagements? I wanted to check with you and see if, brothers in local areas, or if you're going to be out doing any presentations that they can come out and see you.
Yes, absolutely. Let me pull up the calendar for just a moment. So the next upcoming thing that I have on the agenda is Monday, September 9th. And it's going to be at Centennial Lafayette Lodge, number 544, here in Carnegie, Pennsylvania. They're doing a dinner at 6:30 before their stated meeting starts at 7:30. And it's interesting because it's definitely the first presentation that I'm doing that really isn't explicitly about Freemasonry at all, but I was grateful that they invited me to do this. So they're asking, it's a presentation called A Writer's Journey, where I'm basically talking about what the events of the past, technically either 2 years, or if you want to go back to the origins of writing those articles, the past decade, have been like leading up to this point of releasing these publications. So that's A Writer's Journey, which I'm presenting at Centennial Lafayette Lodge on Monday, September 9th in Carnegie, Pennsylvania. And I would urge people to do the courtesy of reaching out to their lodge secretary if they are interested to come, just so they have a head count for their dinner and so forth.
Right on. I'll make sure I put a link back in the show notes to the lodge as well, so folks can click on that link, check out the lodge, and if there's contact information, please do reach out as a common courtesy to the secretary. Brother Austin, I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of you coming on the program. A lot of people know that everybody in the world is as busy as all get out these days, and it is a challenge to meet and schedule things and get together to do these talks. So I want to thank you again for making the time, for spending time answering questions and giving some advice to folks, and in general for what you're doing for the craft, and for staying busy in the craft, and also for leaving legacy work behind. That's very important.
Brother Robert, I mean, you scarcely have to thank me. The conversation has been a distinct pleasure for me. And at the risk of sounding a little bit over the top, I really do consider it an honor to be on your program, because of the magnitude of the impact that you've been able to have on Masonic education for people, in such a broad span, like, transcending jurisdictions. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity that you're giving me to reach people. And, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, the feeling is mutual, brother. So thank you so much. My thanks again, one more time, goes out to Illustrious Brother Austin Shifrin, who spent a good hour of his time with us. And of course, all that time writing and putting these things out and making yourself available to inspire new Masonic authors and the like. So thank you very much to Brother Austin. It's a pleasure speaking with you. If you're interested, all of the links will be in the show notes for this particular episode. You can check out both of his books. You can check out the lodge he'll be speaking at, as well as a number of other things. And speaking of those other things, one more time, I want to thank our producers, fellows, contributors, and legacy partners of the WCY podcast. Like what you hear? Want to learn how you can help assist in the production of the show? Then head on over there, WCYpodcast.com, click on support the show, and explore the website a little bit, see what interests you. And thanks again for considering supporting your source for Masonic education. That's it for this week. I hope you all enjoyed, learned a little something as much as I did. I know I learned a lot. One more thanks to Brother Austin. And until next week, stay on the level for Whence Came You. I'm Robert Johnson. Take care.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.
WCY Media.
Why, that's me, man.